Hello everyone, welcome back to the cottage. I'm Cheyenne with the Rosevine Cottage Girls, and today we're going to be working on homemade bread. Today's loaf is going to be an egg enriched loaf, and it makes this beautiful super tall loaf, and it's absolutely delicious. Perfect for sandwiches, and it's super easy to make. So we're going to get started and I'm going to walk you through how to make your own bread. We're going to take our water. This is 1 1/3 cups of water. I'm using filtered water. And 2 tablespoons of butter, and we're going to warm the water and melt the butter at the same time. And then we are ready to proof our yeast. The water is warm, the butter is melted, and we're going to add this to our bowl. You can use a stand-up mixer if you want, or just a bowl like this is fine. I'm going to add my sugar. This is 2 teaspoons of raw sugar. And we're going to let that melt and our water cool down so we can add our yeast. Okay, so our water has cooled down. We're going to add our yeast just by sprinkling it on top. This is instant yeast, and it's going to be a teaspoon for this recipe. If you look down in the description down below, we'll have the recipe and lots of resources for you. But we're just going to set this to the side and let it proof for a couple of minutes, and then we will be ready to move on to our next step of adding salt and flour. Alright, so our yeast has started to puff up. If your yeast did not puff, you want to start over and get fresh yeast because your yeast is dead and it's not going to give you the rise you're looking for. So we're going to start adding our flour. If you're doing this in a mixer, you can just add it by the cup load. We're going to add 4 1/2 cups of bread. I am not going to be using my mixer. I'm using my Dutch dough whisk and just a bowl. I like to go about halfway and then start mixing. And then we are going to add our salt. This is 1.5 teaspoons of pink Himalayan salt. The goal is not to spray it on the counter. Alright, and I've got that mostly combined. I'm going to go ahead and add more flour. Just going to keep mixing until your flour is combined. Alright, so I'm going to crack 1 egg into my mix and then add 1 egg yolk on top of that. And if you need to switch to a mixer, that's totally fine. You can also do this in a bread machine by just adding bread ingredients at the bottom, placing your flour on top, and then putting your sugar, yeast, and salt in opposite corners. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and just use my hand to incorporate the rest of this. And if you find that your bread dough just can't hold any more flour, you can either stop and leave what's left out, or you can add just a splash of water. How much flour your recipe takes is going to depend a lot on the type of flour you're using, the humidity in the air, and honestly, it just could depend on if you forgot anything. I'm using a King Arthur all-purpose flour today. And this is, once you start getting in there, it's still pretty tacky. So I'm going to go ahead and add some more flour. If you do need to add more water, remember to do it in little bits and starts, because you can always add more, but you can't take it away. Alright, so we are going to just knead this for a little bit to get it into a nice ball. Now we are going to put it into an oiled bowl in a nice warm spot. We're going to cover it with plastic wrap and just let it double in size so that we are ready for a nice loaf of bread. Alright, so we're just going to oil our bowl lightly so that our dough doesn't stick. Go ahead and put whatever's extra on your hand on top of your loaf just to keep it from drying out, and pop it in your bowl. And you can use a damp towel or apron to go over top, or you can just use some plastic wrap. I'm opting for the plastic wrap today. And we're just going to tighten that down. And my favorite place to let this rise is next to our stove while we're cooking. If you're making something on the stove, that's a great time to make your bread. Or if it's a nice warm day, you can pop it outside and let the sunshine heat up your bowl and help it to rise. But you're just looking for a draft-free, warm environment to let this rise for a couple hours or until it's doubled in size, and then we are ready to shape it and put it in our pan. Our bread has risen. It's actually risen more than I was expecting. So we've got our oven preheating to 350, and we are going to grease our bread pan right now. I'm using butter. You can use lard or really anything you want to. Oil will work. You just want to make sure that your dough doesn't stick while it's baking. Butter wrappers also work really well for this. Just pull out your butter and then rub the wrapper around your pan. Alright. There we go. Now we're just going to shape it before we put it into our loaf pan. You just want it the nice, smooth, finished edge. I had a bubble forming on the top and I did not want it there. So just pop it and then work it back in. And if your dough is sticking to your countertop, you can lightly dust it with flour and wet your hands if it's too sticky for your fingers. And we're just working it to seal up that seam on the bottom. There we go, kind of like that. That is a red pepper flake that has worked in there. That'll be a spicy surprise. Alright, so our pan is kind of long, so we're just going to work it into a shape that's better for the pan. And then tuck those edges under so it's a nice pretty edge. Got a couple of bubbles showing up. And we're just going to same side down in the pan. I like to tuck any exposed rough edges back in. And then we're going to recover it with our plastic wrap and let it rise yet again while our oven preheats. So this is one of our favorite pans. It's from 10 Strawberry Street, and we use them for all of our bread baking pretty much. When you lay your plastic wrap down, you want to make sure it is oiled on the side that's going to be closest to your dough. And then just lightly sit it, don't seal it down so that it will hit your bread when it rises and get stuck, and then you'll have to re-rise. It's a whole mess. So just loosely sit it over the top and make sure it's oiled and put it back in a warm spot. Alright, so our bread has gone through its second proofing and risen to just about here on our bread pan. It's going to rise more in the oven. Oven's preheated. We're going to bake this for 30 minutes and then pull it out, and it'll be ready to cool for just a little bit, and then we'll remove it from our pan so it doesn't stick. But let's get it in the oven. Alright, our timer went off. We pulled it out of the oven. It looks gorgeous. It smells even better than it looks. And I like to just take a little pat of butter and brush it, or rub it rather, over the top of. And it just makes it, I think, have a better finish with the butter rubbed over the top. But you totally can skip this part if you want to. There we go. Alright, so if you think you're going to eat this really fast, which happens at our house quite often, you can just make this recipe like this. We're going to leave it in the pan for 5-10 minutes and then pop it out and let it cool the rest of the way on a rack so it doesn't get moist on the bottom. If you don't think you're going to eat it that fast, add a spoon of ginger to your recipe when you're adding the salt and all of that in the beginning, and that will help to keep your bread fresher longer, and you won't be able to taste it at all. So it'll make a really nice fresh loaf for longer. And that's it. We're going to store this in a bread bag or a plastic bag, depending on what you have, just to keep the air out, and enjoy. I've misplaced our hot pan holder, so I'm using towels. We're just going to gently pop that out. Move that over. Look at that. This is such a showy loaf. It's absolutely beautiful. If you enjoyed today's video, make sure you like this video, share it with a friend, give it a thumbs up, or comment down below. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments and we will do our very best to answer them. As always, our recipe and tons of resources are in the description down below, so make sure you check that out, and we'll see you next time at the cottage.